Chapter 2 Tengo. Something else in mind. Tengo's first memory dated from the time he was 1.5. His mother had taken off her blouse and dropped the shoulder straps of her white slip to let a man who was not his father suck on her breasts. The infant in the crib nearby was probably Tengo himself. He was observing the scene as a third person. Or could the infant have been his twin? No, not likely. It was 1.5-year-old Tengo. He knew this intuitively. The infant was asleep, its eyes closed, its little breaths deep and regular. The vivid 10-second scene was seared into the wall of his consciousness, his earliest memory in life. Nothing came before or after it. It stood out alone, like the steeple of a town visited by a flood, thrusting up above the muddy water. Tengo made a point of asking people how old they were at the time of their first memory. For most people it was 4 or 5, 3 at the very earliest. A child had to be at least 3 to begin observing a surrounding scene with a degree of rationality. In the stage before that, everything registered as incomprehensible chaos. The world was a mushy bowl of loose gruel, lacking framework or handholds. It flowed past our open windows without forming memories in the brain. Surely a 1.5-year-old infant was unable to grasp what it meant for a man who was not his father to be sucking his mother's breast. That much was clear. Though if this memory of Tengo's was genuine, the scene must have been seared into his retinas as a pure image free of judgment. He way a camera records objects on film, mechanically, as a blend of light and shadow. And as his consciousness matured, the fixed image held in reserve would have been analysed bit by bit, and meaning applied to it. But is such a thing even possible? Was the infant brain capable of preserving images like that? Or was this simply a false memory of Tengo's? Was it just something that his mind had later decided for whatever purpose or plan to make up on its own? Tengo had given plenty of thought to the possibility that this memory might be a fabrication, but he had arrived at the conclusion that it probably was not. It was too vivid and too deeply compelling to be fake. The light, the smells, the beating of his heart, these felt overwhelmingly real, not like imitations. And besides, it explained many things owed logically and emotionally to assume that the scene was real. This vivid 10-second image would come to him without warning and without consideration of either time or place. He could be riding on the subway or writing formulas on the blackboard or having a meal, or is now sitting and talking to someone across the table, and it would envelop him like a soundal tsunami. By the time he noticed, it would be directly in front of him, and his arms and legs would be paralysed. The flow of time stopped. The air grew thin and he had trouble breathing. He lost all connection with the people and things around him. The tsunami's liquid walls swallowed him whole, and though it felt to him as if the world were being closed off in darkness, he experienced no loss of awareness. It was just a sense of having been switched to a new track. Parts of his mind were, if anything, sharpened by the change. He felt no terror, but he could not keep his eyes open. His eyelids were clamped shut. Sounds grew distant, and the familiar image was projected onto the screen of his consciousness again and again. Sweat gushed from every part of his body, and the armpits of his undershirt grew damp. He trembled all over, and his heartbeat grew faster and louder. If he was with someone when it happened, Tengo would feign momentary dizziness. It was, in fact, like a dizzy spell. Everything would return to normal in time. He would pull his handkerchief from his pocket and press it to his mouth. Waiting for the dizziness to pass, he would raise a hand to signal to the other person that it was nothing to worry about. Sometimes it would all be over in 30 seconds, at other times it went on for over a minute. As long as it lasted, the same image would be repeated as if on a tape machine set on automatic. His mother would drop her shoulder straps and some man would start sucking on her hardened nipples. She would close her eyes and heave a deep sigh. The warm, familiar scent of mother's milk hovered faintly in the air. Smell is an infant's most acute sense. The sense of smell reveals a great deal, sometimes it reveals everything. The scene was soundless, the air a dense liquid. All he could hear was the soft beating of his own heart. Look at this, they say. Look at this and nothing else, they say. You are here. You can't go anywhere else, they say. The messages played over and over. This attack was a long one. Tengo closed his eyes, covered his mouth with his handkerchief as always, and gritted his teeth. He had no idea how long it went on. All he could do was guess, based on how worn out he felt afterward. He felt physically drained, more fatigued than he ever felt before. Some time had to go by before he could open his eyes. His mind wanted to wake up, but his muscles and internal organs resisted. He might as well have been a hibernating animal trying to wake up in the wrong season. Tengo, Tengo, someone was calling. The muffled voice seemed to reach him from the depths of a cave. It finally dawned on Tengo that he was hearing his own name. What's wrong, Tengo? Is it happening to you again? Are you all right? The voice sounded closer now. Tengo finally opened his eyes, managed to focus them, and stared at his own right hand gripping the edge of the table. Now he could be sure that the world still existed in one piece and that he was still a part of it. Some numbness remained, but the hand was certainly his. So too was the smell of sweat emanating from him, an oddly harsh odour like a zoo animal's. His throat was dry. Tengo reached for the glass on the table and drank half its contents, carefully trying not to spill any. After a momentary rest to catch his breath, he drank the remainder. His mind was gradually coming back to where it belonged and his senses were returning to normal. He set the empty glass down and wiped his mouth with his handkerchief. "Sorry," he said. "I'm okay now." He knew that the man across from him was Komatsu and that they had been talking at a cafe near Tokyo's Shinjuku station. Sounds of other nearby conversations now sounded like normal voices. The couple at the neighbouring table were staring at him, obviously concerned. The waitress stood by with a worried expression on her face as though she expected her customer to vomit. Tengo looked up and nodded to her, smiling as if to signal, "Don't worry, no problem. That wasn't some kind of fit, was it?" Komatsu asked. "No, it's nothing, a kind of dizzy spell, a bad one," Tengo replied. His voice still didn't sound like his own, though it was getting closer. "It'd be terrible if that happened while you were driving or something," Komatsu said, looking directly at him. "I don't drive." "That's good. I know a guy with a cedar pollen allergy who started sneezing at the wheel and smashed into a telephone pole. Of course, your thing is not just sneezing. I was shocked the first time. I'm more or less used to it now, though sorry." Tengo picked up his coffee cup and gulped down what was left. He tasted nothing, just felt some lukewarm liquid passing down his throat. "Want to order another glass of water?" Komatsu asked. Tengo shook his head. "No, I'm okay now." Komatsu took a pack of Marlboros from his jacket pocket, put one in his mouth, and lit up with the calf's matches. Then he glanced at his watch. "What were we talking about again?" Tengo asked, trying to get back to normal. "Good question," Komatsu said, staring off into space, thinking or pretending to. Tengo could not be sure which. There was a good deal of acting involved in the way Komatsu spoke and gestured. "That's the girl Fuka-AI. We were just getting started on her and her chrysalis." Tengo nodded. That was it. He was just beginning to give his opinion on Fuka-AI and her novella her chrysalis when the attack hit him. Komatsu said, "I was going to tell you about that odd one-word pen name of hers. It is isn't it? The Fuka sounds like part of a family name, and the Eri could be an ordinary girl's name, Eri or Eriko. That's exactly what it is. Her family name is Fukada, and her real first name is Eriko, so she put them together. Fuka plus Eri equals Fuka-AI." Tengo pulled the manuscript from his briefcase and laid it on the table, resting his hand atop the sheaf of paper to reaffirm its presence. "As I mentioned briefly on the phone, the best thing about this chrysalis is that it's not an imitation of anyone. It has absolutely none of the usual new writer's sense of I want to be another so-and-so. The style, for sure, is rough, and the writing is clumsy. She even gets the title wrong. She's confusing chrysalis and cocoon. You could pick it apart completely if you wanted to. But the story itself has real power. It draws you in. The overall plot is a fantasy, but the descriptive detail is incredibly real. The balance between the two is excellent. I don't know if words like originality or inevitability fit here, and I suppose I might agree if someone insisted it's not at that level, but finally, after you work your way through the thing, with all its faults, it leaves a real impression. It gets to you in some strange, inexplicable way that may be a little disturbing." Komatsu kept his eyes on Tengo, saying nothing. He was waiting to hear more. Tengo went on. "I'd hate to see this thing dropped from the competition just because the style is clumsy. I read tons of submissions over the years, or maybe I should say skimmed rather than read. A few of them were fairly well written, of course, but most of them are just off well. And out of all those manuscripts, this chrysalis is the only one that moved me the least bit. It's the only one that ever made me want to read it again." Well, Komatsu said, and then, as if he found this all rather boring, he released a stream of smoke through his pursed lips. Tengo had known Komatsu too long to be deceived by such a display, however. Komatsu was a man who often adopted an expression that was either unrelated to or exactly the opposite of what he was actually feeling, and so Tengo was prepared to wait him out. "I read it too," Komatsu said after a short pause. "Right after you called me. The writing is incredibly bad, it's ungrammatical, and in some places you have no idea what she's trying to say. She should go back to school and learn how to write a decent sentence before she starts writing fiction. But you did read it to the end, didn't you?" Komatsu smiled. It was the kind of smile he might have found way in the back of a normally unopened drawer. "You're right. I did read it all the way through, much to my own surprise. I never read these new writer prize submissions from beginning to end. I even reread some parts of this one. Let's due street say the planets were in perfect alignment. I'll grant it that much, which means it has something, don't you think? Komatsu set his cigarette in an ashtray and rubbed the side of his nose with the middle finger of his right hand. He did not, however, answer Tengo's question. Tengo said, "She's just 17, a high school kid. She still doesn't have the discipline to read and write fiction, that's all. It's practically impossible for this work to take the New Writers' Prize, I know, but it's good enough to put on the short list. You can make that happen, I'm sure, so then she can win next time," whom Komatsu said with another non-committal answer and a yawn. He took a drink from his water glass. Think about it, Tengo, imagine if I put it on the short list. The members of the selection committee will defaint or more likely have a shit fit, but they would definitely not read it all the way through. All 4 of them are active writers busy with their own work. They'd skim the first couple of pages and toss it out as if it were some grade school composition. I could plead with them to give it another try and guarantee them it would be brilliant with a little polishing here and there. But who's going to listen to me, even supposing I could make it happen? I'd only want to do that for something with more promise. So you're saying we should drop it just like that? No, that is not what I'm saying, Komatsu said, rubbing the side of his nose. I've got something else in mind for this story. Something else in mind, Tengo said. He sensed something ominous in Komatsu's tone. You're saying we should count on her next work as a winner, Komatsu said. I'd like to be able to do that too, of course. One of an editor's greatest joys is nurturing a young writer over time. It's a thrill to look at the clear night sky and discover a new star before anybody else sees it. But to tell you the truth, Tengo, I don't believe this girl has an next work in her. Not to boast, but I've been making my living in this business for 20 years now. I've seen writers come and go. And if I've learned anything, it's how to tell the difference between writers who have a next work in them and those who don't. And if you ask me, this girl doesn't have one. Her next work is not going to make it, and neither will the one after that or the one after that. First of all, look at the style. No amount of work is going to make it any better. It's never going to happen, and the reason it's never going to happen is that the writer herself doesn't give a damn about style. She shows absolutely no intention of wanting to write well, of wanting to improve her writing. Good style happens in one of 2 ways. The writer either has an inborn talent or is willing to work herself to death to get it, and this girl, Coqui-AI, belongs to neither type. Don't ask me why, but style as such simply doesn't interest her. What she does have, though, is the desire to tell a story, of fairly strong desire. I grant her that. Even in this raw form, it was able to draw you in, Tengo, and it made me read the manuscript all the way through. That alone is impressive, you could say, but she has no future as a novelist, none. I hate to disappoint you, but that's my honest opinion. Tengo had to admit that Komatsu could be right. The man possessed good editorial instincts, if nothing else. Still, it wouldn't hurt to give her a chance, would it? Tengo asked. You mean, throw her in and see if she sinks or swims? In a word, I've done too much of that already. I don't want to watch anybody else drown. Well, what about me? You at least are willing to work hard, Komatsu said cautiously. As far as I can tell, you don't cut corners. You're very modest when it comes to the act of writing. And why? Because you like to write. I value that in you. It's the single most important quality for somebody who wants to be a writer, but not in itself enough. No, of course, not in itself enough. There also has to be that special something, an indefinable quality, something I can't quite put my finger on. That's the part of fiction I value more highly than anything else. Stuff I understand perfectly doesn't interest me, obviously. It's very simple. Tengo fell silent for a while. Then he said, does Coqui-AI's writing have something you don't understand perfectly? Yes, it does, of course. She has something important. I don't know what it is exactly, but she has it. That much is clear. It's obvious to you, and it's obvious to me. Anybody can see it, like the smoke from a bonfire on a windless afternoon. But whatever she has, Tengo, she probably can't carry it on her own, meaning, if we throw her in the water, she'll drown, exactly. And that's why you don't want to put her on the short list. That is exactly why. Komatsu contorted his lips and folded his hands on the table. Which brings us to a point in the conversation where I have to be very careful how I express myself. Tengo picked up his coffee cup and stared at the puddle inside. Then he put the cup down again. Komatsu still had not spoken. Tengo asked, is this where I find out what you mean by something else? Komatsu narrowed his eyes like a teacher glancing upon his prize pupil. He nodded slowly and said, it is. There was something inscrutable about this man, Komatsu. You couldn't easily tell from his expression or tone of voice what he was thinking or feeling. He appeared to derive a good deal of pleasure from keeping others guessing. Mentally, he was very quick, that was for certain. He was a type of man who had his own sense of logic and reached his own conclusions without regard to the opinions of others. He did not engage in pointless intellectual display, but it was clear that he had read an enormous amount, and that his knowledge was both wide-ranging and deep. Nor was it simply a matter of factual knowledge. He had an intuitive eye both for people and for books. His biases played a large role here, but Fo or Komatsu bias was an important element of truth. He never said a great deal, and he hated long-winded explanations, but when necessary he could present his views logically and precisely. He could also be quite caustic if he felt like it, aiming a quick and merciless jab at his opponent's weakest point. He had very strong opinions about both people and literature. The works and individuals he could not tolerate far outnumbered those he could. But surprisingly, the number of people who disliked him was far greater than those who thought well of him, which was exactly what he hoped for. Tengo thought that Komatsu enjoyed the isolation and even relished being openly hated. Komatsu believed that mental acuity was never born from comfortable circumstances. At 45, Komatsu was 16 years older than Tengo. A dedicated editor of literary magazines, he had established a certain reputation as one of the top people in the industry, but no one knew a thing about his private life. He met with people constantly in his work, but he never spoke of anything personal. Tengo had no idea where he was born or raised, or even where he lived. They often had long conversations, but such topics never came up. People were puzzled that a difficult man like Komatsu was able to solicit manuscripts from writers he had no friends to speak of and displayed only contempt for the literary world, but over the years he managed, almost effortlessly, to obtain work by famous authors for the magazine, and more than a few issues of their contents to his efforts. So even if they didn't like him, people respected him. Rumour had it that when Komatsu was a student in the prestigious University of Tokyo's Department of Literature in 1960, he had been one of the leaders of the huge leftist demonstrations against the US-Japan Security Treaty. He was said to have been near fellow student Michiko Kanba when she was killed by riot police and to have suffered serious injuries himself. No one knew if this was true, but there was something about Komatsu that made the stories seem convincing. He was tall and angry, with an oversized mouth and an undersized nose. He had long limbs and nicotine-stained fingers reminiscent of those failed revolutionary intellectuals in 19th century Russian novels. He rarely smiled, but when he did it was with his whole face. Not that it made him look especially happy, he was more like an old sorcerer chuckling to himself over an ominous prophecy he was about to reveal. Clean and decently groomed, he always wore a tweed jacket, white Oxford cloth or pale grey polo shirt, no tie, grey pants, suede shoes, a uniform meant to show the world. He didn't care about these things. Tengo imagined a half-dozen three-button tweed jackets of a subtly different colour cloth and pattern that hung, carefully brushed, in Komatsu's closet. Perhaps Komatsu had to attach numbered tags to distinguish one jacket from another. Komatsu's fine, wary hair was beginning to show a touch of grey in front. Tangled on the sides, it was long enough to cover his ears, and it always stayed that length, about a week overdue for a haircut. Tengo wondered how such a thing was possible. At times Komatsu's eyes would take on a sharp glow, like stars glittering in the winter night sky. And if something caused him to clam up, he would maintain his silence like a rock on the far side of the moon. All expression would disappear from his face and his body seemed to go cold. Tengo first met Komatsu 5 years earlier when he was shortlisted for the new Writers' Prize competition of Komatsu's magazine. Komatsu called and said he wanted to get together for a chat. They agreed to meet in a cafe in Shinjuku, the same one in which they were now sitting. Komatsu told Tengo there was no way his work would take the prize, and in fact it did not. Komatsu himself, however, had enjoyed the story. "I'm not looking for thanks, but I almost never say this to anyone," he said. This was in fact true, as Tengo came to learn, "so I'd like you to let me read your next story before you show it to anyone else." Tengo promised to do that. Komatsu also wanted to learn about Tengo as a person, his experience growing up, what he was doing now. Tengo explained himself as honestly as he could. He was born in the city of Ichikawa in nearby Chiba Prefecture. His mother died of an illness shortly after he was born, or at least that was what his father told him. He had no siblings. His father never remarried but raised Tengo by himself, collecting television subscription fees door to door to make a living. Now, however, his father had Alzheimer's disease and was living in a nursing home on the southern tip of Chiba's Boso Peninsula. Tengo himself had graduated from Tsukuba University's oddly named School 1 College of Natural Studies mathematics major and was writing fiction while teaching mathematics at a private cram school in Yuyaji. At the time of his graduation, he could have taken a position at a prefectural high school near home, but instead chose the relatively free schedule of the Tokyo Cram School. He lived alone in a small apartment in the Koenji district west of downtown Tokyo, which gave him an easy half-hour commute to school. Tengo did not know for certain whether he wanted to be a professional novelist, nor was he sure he had the talent to write fiction. What he did know was that he could not help spending a large part of every day writing fiction. To him, writing was like breathing. Komatsu said practically nothing as he listened to Tengo's story. He seemed to like Tengo, though it was not clear why. Tengo was a big man. He had been a key member of his judo team in middle school, high school and college, and he had the eyes of an early waking farmer. He wore his hair short, seemed always to have a tan, and had cauliflower ears. He looked neither like a youthful devotee of literature nor like a teacher of mathematics, which was also something that Komatsu seemed to like about him. Whenever Tengo finished a story, he would take it to Komatsu. Komatsu would read it and offer his comments. Tengo would rewrite it following his advice and bring it to Komatsu again, who would provide new instructions, like a coach raising the bar a little at a time. Your case might take some time, he said, but we're in no hurry. Just make up your mind to write every single day, and don't throw anything out. It might come in handy later. Tengo agreed to follow Komatsu's advice. For his part, Komatsu would occasionally send small writing jobs Tengo's way. Anonymously, Tengo wrote copy for the women's magazine produced by Komatsu's publisher. He handled everything, revising letters to the editor, writing background pieces on movies and books, composing horoscopes. His horoscopes were especially popular because they were often right. Once when he wrote, "Beware an early morning earthquake," there actually was a big earthquake early one morning. Tengo was grateful for the extra income and for the writing practice this work provided. It made him happy to see his writing in print in any form displayed in the bookstores. Eventually Tengo was hired as a screener for the literary magazine's New Writers' Prize. It was odd for him to be screening other writers' works when he himself was competing for the prize, but he read everything impartially, not terribly concerned about the delicacy of his situation. If nothing else, the experience of reading mounds of badly written fiction gave him an indelible lesson in exactly what constituted badly written fiction. He read hour on 100 works each time, choosing 10 that might have some point to them to bring to Komatsu with written comments. 5 works would make it to the shortlist, and from those the 4-person committee would select the winner. Tengo was not the only part-time screener, and Komatsu was only one of several editors engaged in assembling the shortlist. This was all in the name of fairness, but such efforts were not really necessary. No matter how many works were entered in a competition, there were never more than 2 or 3 of any value, and no one could possibly miss those. 3 of Tengo's stories had made the shortlist in the past. Each had been chosen not by Tengo himself, of course, but by 2 other screeners and then by Komatsu, who manned the editorial desk. None had won the prize, but this had not been a crushing blow to Tengo. For one thing, Komatsu had ingrained in him the idea that he just had to give it time, and Tengo himself was not all that eager to become a novelist right away. If he arranged his teaching schedule well, Tengo was able to spend 4 days a week at home. He had taught at the same cram school for 7 years now, and he was popular with the students because he knew how to convey the subject succinctly and clearly, and he could answer any question on the spot. Tengo surprised himself with his own eloquence. His explanations were clever, his voice carried well, and he could excite the class with a good joke. He had always thought of himself as a poor speaker, and even now he could be at a loss for words and confronted face to face. In a small group, he was strictly a listener. In front of a large class, however, his head was clear, and he could speak at length with ease. His own teaching experience gave him renewed awareness of the inscrutability of human beings. Tengo was not dissatisfied with his salary. It was by no means high, but the school paid in accordance with ability. The students were asked to do course evaluations periodically, and compensation hinged on the results. The school was afraid of having its best teachers lured away, and in fact, Tengo had been headhunted several times. This never happened at ordinary schools. There, salary-wise set by seniority, teachers' private lives were subject to the supervision of administrators, and ability and popularity counted for nothing. Tengo actually enjoyed teaching at the cram school. Most of the students went there with the explicit purpose of preparing for the college entrance exams, and they attended his lectures enthusiastically. Teachers had only one duty: to teach their classes. This was exactly what Tengo wanted. He never had to deal with student misbehavior or infractions of school rules. All he had to do was show up in the classroom and teach students how to solve mathematical problems. And a manipulation of pure abstractions using numerical tools came naturally to Tengo. When he was home, Tengo usually wrote from first thing in the morning until the approach of evening. All he needed to satisfy him was his Montblanc pen, his bluing, and standard manuscript sheets, each page lined with 400 empty squares ready to accept 400 characters. Once a week his married girlfriend would come to spend the afternoon with him. Sex with a married woman 10 years his senior was stress-free and fulfilling, because it could not lead to anything. As the sun was setting, he would head out for a long walk, and once the sun was down he would read a book while listening to music. He never watched television. Whenever the fee collector came, he would point out that he had no television set and politely refused to pay. "I really don't have one. You can come in and look if you want," he would say, but the collector would never come in. They were not allowed to. I have something bigger in mind, Komatsu said. Something bigger, much bigger. Why be satisfied with small-scale stuff like the new writer's prize? As long as we're aiming, why not go for something big? Tengo fell silent. He had no idea what Komatsu was getting at, but he sensed something disturbing. The Akutagawa Prize, Komatsu declared after a moment's pause. The Akutagawa Prize. Tengo repeated the E word slowly, as if he were writing them in huge characters with a stick on wet sand. Come on, Tengo, you can't be that out of touch. The Akutagawa Prize, every writer's dream. Huge headlines in the paper, television, news. Now you're losing me. Are we still talking about Fuka-Eri? Of course we are. Fuka-Eri and her chrysalis. Have we been discussing anything else? Tengo bit his lip as he tried to fathom the meaning behind Komatsu's words. But you yourself said there's no way our chrysalis can take the new writer's prize. Haven't we been talking about that all along? How the work will never amount to anything the way it is. Precisely. It'll never amount to anything the way it is. That is for certain. Tengo needed time to think. Are you saying it needs to be revised? It's the only way. It's not that unusual for an author to revise a promising work with the advice of an editor. It happens all the time, only, in this case, rather than the author. Someone else will do the revising. Someone else? Tengo asked, but he already knew what Komatsu's answer would be. You. Tengo searched for an appropriate response, but couldn't find one. He heaved a sigh and said, You know as well as I do that this work is going to need more than a little patching here and there. It'll never come together without a fundamental top-to-bottom rewrite, which is why you rewrite it from top to bottom. Just use the E-framework of the story as is, and keep as much of the tone as possible, but change a language, a total remake. You'll be in charge of the actual writing, and I'll be the producer, just like that. Tengo muttered, as if to himself. Look, Komatsu said, picking up a spoon and pointing it at Tengo the way a conductor uses his baton to single out a soloist from the rest of the orchestra. This Fuka-Eri girl has something special. Anyone can see it reading her chrysalis. Her imagination is far from ordinary. Unfortunately, though her writing is hopeless, a total mess, you, on the other hand, know how to write. Your storylines are good. You have taste. You may be built like a lumberjack, but you write with intelligence and sensitivity, and real power, unlike Fuka-Eri, though you still haven't grasped exactly what it is you want to write about, which is why a lot of your stories are missing something at the core. I know you've got something inside you that you need to write about, but you can't get it to come out. It's like a frightened little animal hiding way back in a cave. You know it's in there, but there's no way to catch it until it comes out, which is why I keep telling you, just give it time. Tengo shifted awkwardly on the boot's vinyl seat. He said, Nothing. The answer is simple, Komatsu said, still lightly waving his spoon. We put the two writers together and invent a brand new one. We add your perfect style to Fuka-Eri's raw story. It's an ideal combination. I know you've got it in you. Why do you think I've been backing you all this time? Just leave the rest to me. With the two of you together, then your writer's prize will be easy, and then we can shoot for the Akutagawa. I haven't been wasting my time in this business all these years. I know how to pull the right strings. Tengo let his lips part as he stared at Komatsu. Komatsu put his spoon back in his saucer. It made an abnormally loud sound. Supposing the story wins the Akutagawa prize, then what? Tengo asked, recovering from the shock. If it takes the Akutagawa, it'll cause a sensation. Most people don't know the value of a good novel, but they don't want to be left out. So they'll buy it and read it, especially when they hear it was written by a high school girl. If the book sells, it'll make a lot of money. We'll split it 3 ways. I'll take care of that. Never mind the money, Tengo said, his eyes flat. How about your professional ethics as an editor? If the scheme became public, it'd cause an uproar. You'd lose your job. It wouldn't come out so easily. I can handle the whole thing very carefully, and even if it did come out, I'd be glad to leave the company. Management doesn't like me, and they've never treated me decently. Finding another job will be no problem for me. Besides, I wouldn't be doing it for the money. I'd be doing it to screw the literary world. Those bastards all huddle together in their gloomy cave and kiss each other's asses, and lick each other's wounds, and trip each other up, all the while spewing this pompous crap about the Messian of literature. I want to have a good laugh at their expense. I want to outwit the system and make idiots out of the whole bunch of them. Doesn't that sound like fun to you? It did not sound like all that much fun to Tengo. For one thing, he had never actually seen this literary world, and when he realized that a competent individual like Komatsu had such childish motives for crossing such a dangerous bridge, he was momentarily at a loss for words. It sounds like a scam to me, he said at length. Cut their ship is not that unusual, Komatsu said with a frown. Half the magazine's serialized manga are co-authored, the staff toss around ideas and make up a story, the artist does simple line drawings, his assistants fill in the details and add colour. It's not much different from the Huawei factory makes alarm clocks. The same sort of thing goes on in the fiction world, romance novels for example. With most of those, the publisher hires writers to make up stories following the guidelines they've established. Division of labour, that's the system. Mass production would be impossible any other way. In the Coqui-AI's world of literary fiction, of course, such methods are not openly sanctioned, so as a practical strategy we have to set Fuka-AI up as our single author. If the deception comes out, it might cause a bit of a scandal, but we wouldn't be breaking the law, we'd just be riding the current of the times, and besides, we're not talking about a Balzac or a Murasaki Shikibu here. All we'd be doing is patching the holes in the stories some high school girl wrote and making it a better piece of fiction. What's wrong with that? If the finished work is good and brings pleasure to a lot of readers, then no harm done, don't you agree? Tengo gave some thought to what Komatsu was saying, and he answered with care. I see two problems here. I'm sure 30 or more than that, but for now let me concentrate on these two. One is that we don't know whether the author, Fuka-AI, would go along with having someone else rewrite her work. If she says no, of course, that's the end of that. The other problem, assuming she says okay, is whether I could really do a good job of rewriting it. Co-authorship is a very delicate matter. I can't believe things would go as easily as you are suggesting. I know you can do it, Tengo, Komatsu said without hesitation, as if he had been anticipating Tengo's reaction. I have no doubt whatever. I knew it the first time I read Chrysalis. The first thing that popped into my head was Tengo has to rewrite this. It's perfect for you. It's aching for you to rewrite it. Don't you see? Tengo merely shook his head, saying nothing. There's no rush, Komatsu said quietly. This is important. Take 2 or 3 days to think about it. Read Chrysalis again. And give some good, careful thought to what I'm proposing, and oh yes, let me give you this. Komatsu withdrew a brown envelope from his breast pocket and handed it to Tengo. Inside the envelope were 2 standard-size colour photos, pictures of a girl. One showed her from the chest up, the other was a full-length snapshot. They seemed to have been taken at the same time. She was standing in front of a stairway somewhere, a broad stone stairway. Classically beautiful features. Long, straight hair, white blouse, small and slim. Her lips were trying to smile, but her eyes were resisting. Serious eyes. Eyes in search of something. Tengo stared at the 2 photos. The more he looked, the more he thought about himself at that age, and the more he sensed a small, dull ache in his chest. It was a special ache, something he had not experienced for a very long time. That's Fuka-AI, Komatsu said. Beautiful girl, don't you think? Sweet and fresh. 17, perfect. We won't tell anyone that her real name is Eriko Fukada. We'll keep her as Fuka-AI. Name alone should cause a stir if she wins the Akutigo prize, don't you think? She have reporters swarming around her like bats at sunset. The books will sell out overnight. Tengo wondered how Komatsu had gotten hold of the photos. Entrants were not required to send in photos with their manuscripts. But he decided not to ask, partly because he didn't want to know the answer, whatever it might be. You can keep those, Komatsu said. They might come in handy. Tengo put them back into the envelope and laid them on the manuscript. Then he said to Komatsu, I don't know much about how the industry works, but sheer common sense tells me this is a tremendously risky plan. Once you start lying to the public, you have to keep lying. It never ends. It's not easy, either psychologically or practically, to keep tweaking the truth to make it all fit together. If one person who's in on the plan makes one little slip, everybody could be done for, don't you agree? Komatsu pulled out another cigarette and lit it. You're absolutely right, it is risky. There are a few too many uncertainties at this point in time. One slip, and things could get very unpleasant for us. I'm perfectly aware of that. But you know, Tengo, taking everything into consideration, my instincts still tell me go for it, for the simple reason that you don't get chances like this very often. I've never had one before, and I'm sure I'll never have another one. Comparing this to gambling might not be the best way to look at it, but we've got all the right cards, and the mountain of chips. The conditions are perfect. If we let a chance like this slip away, we'll regret it for the rest of our lives. Tengo stared in silence at Komatsu's utterly sinister smile. Komatsu continued, and the most important thing is that we are remaking your Chrysalis into a much better work. It's a story that should have been much better written. There's something important in it, something that needs someone to bring it out. I'm sure you think so too, Tengo. Am I wrong? We each contribute our own special talents to the project. We pool our resources for one thing only, and that is to bring out that important something in the work. Our motives are pure. We can present them anywhere without shame. Well, you can try to rationalize it all you want. You can invent all kinds of noble-sounding pretexts, But in the end, a scam is a scam. Look, Tengo, you're losing sight of one crucial fact, Komatsu said, his mouth opening in a big, wide grin the likes of which Tengo had never seen. Or should I say you are deliberately choosing not to look at it? And that's the simple fact that you want to do this. You already feel that we're risk, and morality be damned, I can see it. You're itching to rewrite or crystallize with your own hands. You want to be the one, not Fukareri, who brings out that special something in the work. I want you to go home now and figure out what you really think. Stand in front of a mirror and give yourself a long, hard look. It's written all over your face. Tengo felt the air around him growing thin. He glanced at his surroundings. Was the image coming to him again? But no, there was no sign of it. The thinness of the air had come from something else. He pulled his handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from his brow. Komatsu was always right. Why should that be?